Step away from the weapons cage, maintenance. Sergeant Derek Martinez's voice cut through the morning air of Fort Garrison's Blacksite Armory, like a blade through silk. The words weren't shouted, but they carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the vicinity stop what they were doing and turn to watch. His 6'2" frame blocked the reinforced steel entrance, casting a shadow that stretched across the polished concrete floor toward the smaller figure standing at the security checkpoint. Dakota Rivers didn't flinch. She simply lifted her eyes from the biometric scanner she'd been about to use, and met his gaze with the kind of steady calm that suggested she'd heard worse from better. At 5'4", wearing a faded maintenance uniform that had seen too many wash cycles, she looked exactly like what her paperwork said she was. A supply specialist from the motor pool, here to verify equipment serial numbers for the quarterly audit. But the way she moved her hand away from the scanner, slow and deliberate, like someone who understood the importance of non-threatening gestures in a room full of weapons, made Chief Warrant Officer Tom Bradley pause in his morning coffee routine. He'd been running security protocols at military installations for 15 years, and something about this maintenance specialist triggered an instinct he'd learned to trust in Kandahar. The Silver Star medal in her cargo pocket weighed exactly 1.3 ounces. Dakota knew this because she'd carried it every day for 3 years, ever since Captain James Foster had pressed it into her hand with his blood-stained fingers, and made her promise to finish what he'd started. Now, standing in the very armory where Foster had discovered the conspiracy that cost him his life, she could feel the medal's edges through the fabric, sharp as the memory of his last words. Trust no one in supply chain. The wolves are inside. If watching this medal trigger a base-wide alarm makes you wonder what dark secrets are hiding in our military, hit that like button and share this story right now. Your support through the thanks button helps me expose more hidden conspiracies that need to be told. I said step away. Martinez repeated, his hand dropping to rest on his sidearm. Not touching it, not yet, but making sure everyone saw the gesture. Behind him, 3 more soldiers from the armory security detail materialized like shadows given form. Specialist Jake Thompson, tall and lean with the kind of nervous energy that suggested too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Private First Class Mike Chen, whose baby face belied the expert marksman badges on his uniform. And Corporal Tony Garcia, older than the others, with worry lines that deepened every time someone mentioned the word inspection. Around them, 15 soldiers who'd been waiting to check out weapons for the morning's qualification range stood frozen in that peculiar military limbo between wanting to see what happened and not wanting to be noticed by anyone with rank. The armory's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that harsh white glow that made even the cleanest facilities look vaguely industrial. Dakota lifted her hands slightly, palms visible, and took one measured step backward. I have authorized access, Sergeant. CAC card verified. Biometrics on file. Just here for the monthly serial number verification. Martinez smirked, the expression transforming his already harsh features into something crueler. Maintenance doesn't have clearance for Blacksite, especially not at 0630 hours. His eyes swept over her uniform, taking in the lack of unit patches, the absent name tape, the general appearance of someone who'd grabbed whatever was clean from their locker. You're not even in proper duty uniform. That's when Private Elena Rodriguez made her first mistake of the day. The newest member of the armory detail, barely 3 months out of advanced individual training, she stepped forward with the kind of earnest helpfulness that hadn't yet been beaten out of her by military bureaucracy. Sergeant Martinez, her CAC card showed green on the scanner. System says she's authorized. Thompson's hand shot out, shoving Elena back hard enough that she stumbled. Mind your lane, Boot. Nobody asked for your input. The shove was harder than necessary, meant to establish dominance rather than maintain order, and everyone saw it. A few of the waiting soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but nobody intervened. This was the natural order of things in military hierarchy. The new got tested, the weak got pushed, and everyone else kept their heads down and waited for their turn at the weapons window. Dakota watched the interaction without expression, but her fingers found the medal in her pocket, thumb running over the raised star in the center. Foster had tried to go through proper channels. He'd filed reports, submitted evidence, followed the chain of command all the way to the base commander, and for his trouble, he'd ended up with his vehicle mysteriously running off a mountain road during a routine supply run, his death labeled an unfortunate accident caused by driver error. "Bag check," Martinez announced, pointing at the worn backpack slung over Dakota's shoulder. "New security protocol. All non-armory personnel submit to full inspection before entry." Bradley set down his coffee cup with a soft clink against the metal desk. "Since when? I haven't seen any memorandum about new protocols." Martinez didn't even look at him. "Since 0600 this morning, Chief. Colonel's orders. Direct verbal confirmation." He held out his hand toward Dakota. "Bag. Now." The hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds, but everyone noticed it. Dakota's hand tightened on the strap of her backpack, and something flickered across her face. Not fear, exactly, but the kind of calculation that suggested she was running through options and finding them all wanting. Then she unslung the bag and handed it over with the same controlled movements she'd been using since she walked in. Martinez took it and immediately upended it onto the inspection table, the contents spilling out with a clatter that echoed in the suddenly silent armory. The sound was deliberate, theatrical, designed to humiliate as much as inspect. A water bottle rolled off the edge and hit the floor with a hollow thud. Papers scattered across the metal surface, supply forms, equipment lists, the mundane documentation of military logistics, a phone charger tangled with a set of earbuds, a half-eaten protein bar in a crumpled wrapper. And then the metal fell. It hit the concrete floor with a sound that shouldn't have been as loud as it was. Just a small metallic ring, the kind of noise that would normally be lost in the ambient sounds of a busy military facility. But in that moment, with everyone watching, it rang out like a bell. The silver star spun twice before settling, the fluorescent lights catching its surface and throwing tiny reflections across the floor. For a moment, nobody moved. It was just a medal after all. Soldiers had them, earned them, lost them, found them in surplus stores and pawn shops across the country. But there was something about this one, something in the way the light caught the inscription on the back, that made Chief Bradley's blood run cold. Then the alarm started screaming. It wasn't the normal alarm, the one that went off during fire drills or security breaches. This was different. A deep, pulsing tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once, accompanied by red lights that hadn't been activated in the 3 years since the armory had been designated a Blacksite facility. The main doors slammed shut with a pneumatic hiss, emergency locks engaging with a series of mechanical chunks that sounded like a giant's vertebrae clicking into place. "Code black. Code black. Code black." The automated voice was female, calm, utterly without inflection. "Biometric anomaly detected. Lockdown initiated. Remain in place." Martinez stumbled backward, his hand now fully on his weapon, though he hadn't drawn it. "What the hell? What did you do?" Dakota hadn't moved. She stood in the same spot, hands visible, watching as the armory transformed from a mundane military supply point into something that more closely resembled a maximum security prison. Steel shutters rolled down over the windows. Additional locks engaged on the weapons cages. Even the ventilation system changed its tone, switching to internal circulation only. But it was the explosion that really got everyone's attention. It came from outside, from the direction of the motor pool, close enough that they felt it through the reinforced concrete floor. Not a huge explosion, not the earth-shattering boom of heavy ordnance, but the sharp, directed crack of something meant to destroy rather than demolish. Through the one window that hadn't yet been covered by security shutters, they could see black smoke beginning to rise, the kind that came from burning vehicles and melting rubber. "Secondary explosion," Dakota said quietly, her first words since handing over the bag. She was looking at the smoke with an expression of professional interest. "That's thermite. Someone's destroying evidence." "How could you possibly know that?" Bradley had abandoned his desk entirely now, moving toward the window with the careful steps of someone who'd learned not to silhouette himself against potential sniper backgrounds. Dakota turned to look at him, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she let something real show in her expression. "Because I've been tracking this operation for 3 months, Chief. And because that medal belonged to Captain James Foster." She paused, letting that name sink in. "You remember Foster, don't you? the supply officer who died in that unfortunate accident 3 years ago, right after he reported massive discrepancies in ammunition shipments. Martinez's face had gone pale under his Hispanic complexion. That's impossible. Foster's dead. I was at his memorial service. Dead men don't file reports. Dakota agreed. But they leave evidence, and Foster left plenty. The metal was his insurance policy. Microchip embedded in the backing, activated by biometric scanning. He knew someone in this armory was selling weapons to the cartels. He just didn't know who. She looked directly at Martinez. But I do. Thompson had drawn his weapon, not quite pointing it at anyone, but holding it in that ready position that suggested he was one wrong word away from making a bad decision. You're lying. You're some kind of terrorist. That explosion, you caused it. Dakota didn't even look at him. Private Rodriguez, you were on duty last Thursday, 0200 hours, correct? Elena, who had been pressed against the wall trying to become invisible, nodded reluctantly. Did Sergeant Martinez and Specialist Thompson conduct an unscheduled inventory that night? Elena looked between Dakota and her supervisors, fear and confusion warring on her young face. I'm not supposed to. Code Black protocol requires all personnel to assist in security verification. The automated voice interrupted, still maddeningly calm. Full cooperation is mandatory. They said it was a surprise inspection. Elena said quickly, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. But they only checked certain crates, the ones in Section Delta 7. Shut your mouth, Private, Thompson snarled. But there was fear in his anger now. Chief Bradley had picked up the metal from the floor, holding it up to the light. His hands were shaking slightly as he read the inscription on the back. This is Foster's medal, his actual medal. The serial number matches his service record. He looked at Dakota with something approaching awe. How did you get this? He gave it to me, Dakota said simply. Right before he died. I was his handler. Criminal Investigation Division, Special Operations. We'd been building a case for months. Foster was supposed to testify to a grand jury the day after his accident. She made air quotes around the last word. Someone in this room made sure that didn't happen. Another explosion outside, closer this time. The lights flickered, emergency power kicking in with a hum that added another layer to the cacophony of alarms. Through the tactical radio on Bradley's desk, panicked voices started overlapping. Motor pool is on fire. Multiple vehicles destroyed. Where's the fire suppression system? It's been disabled. Someone cut the lines. We need EOD out here now. There might be more devices. Dakota listened to the chaos with the detached interest of someone watching a chess match play out exactly as predicted. 3 months I've been watching you, Martinez. 3 months of midnight inventory adjustments. 3 months of serial numbers that don't match. 3 months of ammunition that disappears from the books and reappears in cartel raids along the border. She pulled a small tablet from her cargo pocket, military grade with a reinforced screen designed to survive combat conditions. Every transaction logged, every discrepancy documented. And now, with the base in lockdown and your associates panicking, trying to destroy evidence, we have you. Martinez's hand was on his weapon now, but Bradley stepped between them, his own hand resting on his sidearm. Nobody draws a weapon in my armory. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd given orders under fire. Martinez, Thompson, Chen, Garcia, all of you step back. Now. She's lying, Chief, Martinez protested, but the conviction had drained from his voice. This is all some kind of setup. That explosion, the alarm, she orchestrated all of it. Actually, Dakota said conversationally, checking her watch, you orchestrated it. The devices in the motor pool? You placed them last night. Garcia helped. The plan was to destroy the vehicles that were supposed to be inspected today, the ones that would have shown they never received the ammunition you claimed to have installed. Classic evidence destruction. Except you didn't count on Foster's medal triggering a code black. Now you're trapped in here with me, and all the evidence you were trying to destroy. From somewhere in the bowels of the armory came a new sound, a mechanical ticking that everyone who'd served in a combat zone recognized immediately. Thompson's head snapped toward the sound. That's a timer. 6 devices, actually, Dakota corrected. Standard C4 with mechanical timers. Old school but reliable. Martinez placed them in the ammunition storage areas about 4 hours ago. The security footage will confirm it once we review the files that he thought he'd deleted. She held up her tablet, showing a thermal imaging display of the armory's layout with 6 pulsing red dots. 5 minutes and 43 seconds until detonation. Unless, of course, someone disarms them. "You're insane," Garcia finally spoke, his voice cracking with panic. "There's enough ammunition in those storage areas to level half the base." Dakota nodded agreeably. "Which is why Sergeant Martinez is going to tell us exactly where each device is located and how to disarm them. Aren't you, Sergeant?" Martinez's hand moved toward his weapon, a motion that seemed to happen in slow motion. Bradley's response was faster, his own sidearm clearing its holster and leveling at Martinez's center mass before the sergeant could complete his draw. "Freeze! Don't even think about it." The tableau held for 3 long seconds, Martinez with his hand frozen on his weapon's grip, Bradley's pistol steady as a rock despite the adrenaline that must have been flooding his system, Thompson looking between them with wild eyes, and Dakota standing calmly in the center of it all like the eye of a hurricane. Then, Elena Rodriguez did something that nobody expected. The young private, the boot, the one everyone had dismissed as inconsequential, pulled the fire alarm. The sprinkler system activated immediately, drenching everyone in seconds. The water was cold, shocking, and it had an immediate effect on the escalating tension. Martinez jerked his hand away from his weapon. Thompson lowered his. And in the confusion of water and alarms and shouting voices, nobody noticed Dakota moving until she was already at the nearest ammunition storage door. "Chief, I need you to open this door." Her voice cut through the chaos with the kind of command authority that transcended rank. "I can disarm these devices, but I need access. Now." Bradley hesitated for maybe half a second, water streaming down his face, his weapon still trained on Martinez. Then he made a decision that would later be credited with saving 300 lives. He tossed his access card to Dakota. "Override code is 7719 Alpha." Dakota caught the card one-handed and swiped it through the reader. The heavy door unsealed with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, visible even from the main floor, cases of ammunition were stacked floor to ceiling. 5.56 NATO, 7.62, 50 caliber, enough firepower to supply a small war. And there, attached to one of the support pillars with industrial tape, was the first device. The timer showed 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Dakota approached it with the kind of calm that only came from experience. Her fingers moved over the device, reading its construction like Braille. Standard configuration. Commercial detonator. She looked back at the crowd of soaked soldiers. "Garcia, you're EOD qualified. Get over here." Garcia shook his head frantically. I can't. You helped build these devices." Dakota's voice was ice. "You can help disarm them. Or would you prefer to explain to the investigation board how you knew enough to help plant them but not enough to stop them?" The implied threat was clear. Cooperate or burn with Martinez. Garcia stumbled forward, his boots splashing through the water that was now an inch deep on the floor. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely stand. "Cut the blue wire first," Dakota instructed, handing him a multi-tool. "Then the red. Do not touch the green wire. It's a decoy. Martinez always uses the same configuration. Foster documented it in his notes." "How do you know Foster's notes?" Martinez demanded, finding his voice again. "Those were classified. Everything Foster documented went straight to CID," Dakota replied without looking at him. "Every meeting he recorded, every conversation he documented, including the one where you offered him $50,000 to look the other way." She glanced back at him. "He was wearing a wire, Martinez. We have your voice on tape." Garcia cut the blue wire. The timer stopped at 3 minutes 41 seconds. 1 down. Dakota was already moving to the next storage area. 5 to go. "If you're really CID," Bradley said, splashing after her, "why all this deception? Why not just arrest them?" "Because we needed them to panic," Dakota explained, swiping the access card at the next door. We needed them to activate their elimination protocol. Every corrupt cell has one, a way to destroy all evidence if they're compromised. Foster discovered it but died before he could tell us the details. So I've spent 3 months pretending to be maintenance, watching, waiting for them to make their move. She entered the second storage room. The metal was the trigger. Foster knew that if someone tried to verify his death certificate against his biometric data, it would trigger a code black. It was his dead man's switch. The second device was hidden behind a stack of ammunition crates. This one was different, more sophisticated, with multiple wires and what looked like a mercury switch designed to detonate if the device was moved. "This one's trapped," Dakota announced. "Everyone stay back." She produced a small mirror from her pocket, using it to examine the underside of the device without touching it. The timer showed 3 minutes, 12 seconds, but that was the least of their problems. The mercury switch meant that any significant vibration could trigger it. "Garcia, I need you to hold this exactly level." She handed him a small level from her toolkit. "If the bubble moves even slightly, we're done. Thompson, Chen, get everyone out of this section. Minimum safe distance." But Thompson didn't move. Instead, he raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Dakota. "Everyone stop. This is insane. She's the threat here. She caused all of this." Private Rodriguez stepped in front of Thompson's weapon. The young private, soaking wet and clearly terrified, stood between Thompson and Dakota with her arms spread wide. "You're going to shoot the only person who can disarm these bombs? Are you that stupid, or just that guilty? Get out of my way, Boot." "No." Elena's voice was stronger now. "I've watched you and Martinez for weeks. The midnight inventories, the vehicles that come and go without logging, the ammunition crates that get loaded but never delivered. I thought I was imagining things, told myself I was just too new to understand. But I wasn't, was I?" Dakota worked while they argued, her fingers moving with surgical precision despite the water dripping from the sprinklers. She isolated the mercury switch, carefully disconnecting it from the main triggering mechanism. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Chen finally spoke up, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "We can't let 300 people die for this." "Shut up," Martinez snarled. "Nobody's dying. She's bluffing. There aren't any real bombs." Dakota pulled the second device free, holding it up for everyone to see. The C4 was clearly visible, gray, putty-like explosive material packed around the detonator. "Real enough for you, Sergeant?" The timer on her tablet showed 2 minutes, 15 seconds to the next detonation. "Where's the third device?" she asked, already moving toward the next storage area. Martinez stayed silent, his jaw clenched tight. Chief Bradley pressed his weapon against Martinez's temple. "Sergeant, I've been patient, but my patience is running out. Where is the third device?" "You don't understand," Martinez said desperately. "These people, the cartel, they'll kill my family. They have my sister, my nephew. If I don't deliver..." Dakota paused at the third storage room door. "When did they take them?" Martinez's composure finally cracked. 2 weeks ago. Said if I didn't increase the shipments, if I didn't provide the new smart weapon systems." He was crying now, tears mixing with the sprinkler water. "I never wanted anyone to die. It was just supposed to be equipment, just things that kill people." Dakota swiped the access card. "Your sister and nephew have been in protective custody for 10 days, Martinez. We extracted them from Juarez last week. They're safe. You've been taking orders from the cartel's voice actors for the past week." The third storage room door opened. This device was the most complex yet, with multiple secondary triggers and what appeared to be a cellular receiver for remote detonation. 1 minute, 45 seconds on the timer. "This is going to be close," Dakota muttered, dropping to her knees in front of the device. "Garcia, I need you to call out the wire sequence from the manifest on that tablet. Chen, find me something to prop this panel open. Elena, radio Colonel Brooks. Tell her we have confirmation on the Martinez cell and request immediate EOD backup." "Colonel Brooks?" Bradley asked. "She's been briefed on this?" Dakota smiled grimly as she worked. "Who do you think authorized this operation? Patricia Brooks has been hunting weapons smugglers for 2 years. Foster was her asset before he was mine. The wires inside the device were a rainbow of colors, far more than the standard configuration. Someone had modified this one, added redundancies and false pathways designed to confuse anyone trying to disarm it. 60 seconds. Garcia read from the tablet, his voice shaking. Blue to ground, red to positive. Bypass the green cluster entirely. Yellow is the actual trigger, not red like the manual says. Dakota's fingers moved with impossible steadiness for someone working under this kind of pressure. She isolated each wire, tracing its path through the mechanism, building a mental map of the device's logic. 45 seconds. Wait, Garcia said suddenly. That's not right. The yellow wire goes to a secondary timer. If you cut it, it triggers immediately. Dakota finished. Nice catch. She shifted her attention to a black wire that had been hidden behind the yellow. This is the real trigger. Classic misdirection. 30 seconds. She cut the black wire. Nothing happened. 25 seconds. The timer's still running, Chen shouted. Dakota didn't panic. She examined the device again, this time noticing a small secondary board hidden beneath the main mechanism. There you are. Someone was paranoid. Double redundancy with a hidden backup trigger. 10 points for creativity. She reached for the backup, fingers finding the tiny connector. 0 points for execution. 15 seconds. She pulled the connector. The timer stopped at 11 seconds. 3 down. Dakota stood, water dripping from her soaked uniform. 3 to go, and about 8 minutes before the colonel arrives with the cavalry. Let's move. The fourth device was in the small arms locker, attached to several cases of M4 carbines that, according to the inventory, shouldn't have existed. These weapons were reported as destroyed in a training accident 6 months ago, but here they were, serial numbers intact, ready for shipment to whoever was willing to pay Martinez's price. These were supposed to go out tonight, Thompson said quietly. He'd given up any pretense of innocence, his weapon now holstered, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The cartel has a truck coming at 2100, 300 rifles, 20,000 rounds of ammunition, and 6 SAW systems. Squad automatic weapons. Dakota shook her head. You were going to put that kind of firepower on the streets. Thompson looked at the floor. They said if we didn't, they'd release the videos. What videos? Thompson and Chen exchanged glances. Las Vegas, 2 years ago. We were on leave, went to a party. There were girls, drugs. They filmed everything. Said they'd send it to our commands, our families, everyone. So you chose treason over embarrassment. Dakota's voice was flat. Foster chose death over dishonor, and you chose to arm cop killers because you couldn't keep it in your pants. The fourth device was simpler than the others, almost rudimentary. Dakota disarmed it in less than 30 seconds, but her expression was grim. This one's different, older explosive, different timer mechanism. This wasn't made by the same person. There's another player, Bradley said, understanding immediately. Dakota nodded. Martinez's cell wasn't the only one operating here. She turned to Garcia. The last 2 devices, where are they? Garcia was already checking the tablet, scrolling through thermal imaging. One's in the special weapons vault. The other, he paled. The other is in the administrative offices, where the personnel files are kept. They're covering their tracks. Dakota was already moving, destroying any paper trail that could identify other cells. Chief, I need access to the special weapons vault. That's where Foster hid his real evidence. The special weapons vault was the most secure part of the armory, requiring 3 separate forms of authentication to enter. Bradley provided his biometric scan and access code, while Dakota entered an override sequence that should have been known only to the base commander and the Pentagon. How do you have that code? Bradley asked. Foster gave it to me, Dakota replied. He got it from the previous armory chief, the one who retired suddenly 3 years ago. The one who tried to report the missing weapons before Martinez had him forced out on trumped-up medical charges. The vault door opened with a deep mechanical groan. Inside, among the heavy weapons and classified systems, was the 5th device. But that wasn't what made Dakota stop in her tracks. The walls were covered with papers, invoices, shipping manifests, photographs, financial records. Foster hadn't just hidden evidence here. He'd turned the vault into a shrine to his investigation. 3 years of work, meticulously organized, waiting for someone to find it. My God, Bradley breathed. He documented everything. Dakota moved to the device, checking the timer. 6 minutes, 30 seconds. But her attention was drawn to a photograph taped to the wall above it. It showed Foster with his family, wife, 2 daughters, all smiling at what looked like a unit barbecue. Below it, in Foster's handwriting, were the words, "For them, always." He knew he was going to die, Dakota said quietly. He knew, and he kept gathering evidence anyway. The 5th device had been modified with a pressure plate under it. If they tried to move it without disarming it first, it would detonate immediately. Dakota studied the configuration, recognizing the handiwork. This is military grade, not cartel work. Someone with EOD training built this. Garcia approached hesitantly. That's my work. From when I was stationed at Fort Campbell. I taught a class on improvised devices. Someone copied my design exactly. Which means someone in your class is involved. Dakota began working on the device, bypassing the pressure plate with a series of careful adjustments. Who else from Campbell is stationed here now? Just one person. Garcia's voice was hollow. Staff Sergeant Williams from the motor pool. The same motor pool that's currently burning. Dakota cut the final wire, and the timer stopped. Williams is destroying his evidence right now, but he didn't count on one thing. She pulled out her phone, showing a video feed from what appeared to be a hidden camera. I've had eyes on the motor pool for weeks. Everything he's doing is being recorded. 5 devices down, 1 to go. They ran through the armory toward the administrative offices, their boots splashing through the water that was now 2 inches deep. The sprinklers had finally shut off, but the damage was done. Thousands of gallons of water had flooded the facility, potentially destroying electronics and ruining paperwork, which, Dakota reflected, might have been part of the plan all along. The administrative office door was locked from the inside. Someone's in there, Bradley said, trying his access card. The lock's been jammed. From inside came the sound of papers being fed into a shredder, the mechanical grinding mixing with the continued ticking of the final device. Stand back. Dakota pulled a small-shaped charge from her vest, pressing it against the lock mechanism. Everyone behind cover. This is going to be loud. The explosion was controlled, directed, barely more than a loud pop, but it was enough to destroy the lock. The door swung open, revealing Staff Sergeant Williams frantically feeding documents into an industrial shredder, while the 6th device sat on the desk, timer showing 2 minutes, 45 seconds. Williams spun around, a pistol in his hand. Stay back, I'll shoot. Dakota didn't even slow down. She walked straight toward him, ignoring the weapon entirely. Go ahead, Williams. Shoot an unarmed federal agent on a base that's in full lockdown, with every security camera recording. That'll really help your situation. Williams's hand shook. The pistol wavered between Dakota and his own temple, indecision written across his face. You don't understand. This goes so much higher than Martinez. There are people, powerful people. Names, Dakota demanded, still walking forward. Give me names and maybe you don't spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. I can't. They'll kill me. Dakota reached the desk, her hand moving to the device. 1 minute, 50 seconds. They'll kill you? Williams, in less than 2 minutes you're going to kill yourself and everyone in this building if I don't disarm this device. So let's reassess your priorities. Williams looked at the timer, at the gun in his hand, at the papers still waiting to be shredded. Then his shoulders slumped, and he set the weapon on the desk. Fort Knox, Fort Hood, Fort Liberty. There are cells at all of them. Same structure, same methods. The cartel has been building this network for 5 years. Names, Williams. I need names. Williams pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Everything's on here. Every contact, every transaction, every shipment. Foster wasn't the only one keeping records. I've been documenting everything, hoping someday I could trade it for protection. Dakota took the drive, pocketing it before turning her attention to the final device. This one was different from all the others. Newer, more sophisticated, with a digital display instead of an analog timer. 1 minute, 20 seconds. "This isn't your work, is it?" she asked Williams. "No. That arrived yesterday by courier. Instructions said to place it with the files. I don't even know what kind of explosive it is." Dakota studied the device, her expression growing concerned. "This is Czech. Military grade. Probably stolen from a NATO shipment." She looked at Bradley. "Chief, evacuate everyone now. Minimum safe distance is 500 meters for this yield. But you can disarm it, right?" Bradley asked. Dakota didn't answer immediately. She was examining the device with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was running calculations in her head. "Maybe. But if I'm wrong, this entire building goes up." She looked at the timer. 1 minute flat. "Go. Now." Bradley grabbed Williams and started pushing him toward the door. "Everyone out. Full evacuation. Move." The armory erupted in controlled chaos as soldiers ran for the exits, their training keeping them from panicking completely, but not preventing the very human fear that came with the knowledge that they had less than 60 seconds to get clear of a potential blast zone. But Elena Rodriguez didn't run. "I'm staying," the private said simply. "You need someone to hold the backup wires while you work on the primary." Dakota looked at the young soldier, soaking wet, terrified, but standing her ground. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Elena moved to the opposite side of the device. "Foster was a good man. He helped my family when we first got here, when my dad was deployed. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Tell me what to do. 45 seconds. Dakota made a decision that went against every protocol in her training. She handed Elena a pair of wire cutters. "When I say cut, you cut the white wire. Not before, not after. Exactly when I say. Understand?" Elena nodded, her hands steady despite the water still dripping from her hair. 30 seconds. Dakota opened the device's main panel, revealing a maze of circuits and wires that looked more like modern art than a bomb. The Czech design was notorious for its complexity, with multiple false pathways and redundant triggers designed to defeat even experienced EOD technicians. 20 seconds. She found what she was looking for, a small circuit board hidden beneath the main assembly, barely visible even with direct lighting. "That's the actual trigger. Everything else is for show." 15 seconds. She looked at Elena. On 3. 1. 10 seconds. 2. 5 seconds. 3. Cut. They cut simultaneously. The timer froze at 2 seconds. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Dakota carefully lifted the device, revealing a maker's mark on the bottom, a small engraving that would later help investigators track the explosive back to a theft from a Czech military depot 6 months earlier. "Clear," Dakota announced into her radio. "All devices disarmed. Building is secure." The relief in Bradley's voice came through the radio immediately. "Understood. Good work. Base security and EOD are 2 minutes out." Dakota looked at Elena, who was staring at the wire cutters in her hand like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "You did good, Private." Foster would have been proud. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I should have said something earlier. About Martinez and the others. I knew something was wrong. You said something when it mattered." Dakota placed a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "That's more than most people do." The sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Sirens, the heavy rumble of military trucks, the distinctive whine of helicopters circling overhead. In minutes, the armory would be flooded with investigators, forensics teams, and enough brass to stock a band. But for now, in this moment, it was just 2 soldiers standing in a flooded office, surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and betrayal, having just prevented a massacre. Chief Bradley's voice came over the radio again. "Agent Rivers, Colonel Brooks is requesting your immediate presence at the command post. She says, and I quote, 'Outstanding work, and she has your next assignment ready.'" Dakota smiled grimly. "Tell the colonel I'll be there shortly. I have one more thing to do here." She walked back through the armory, past the storage rooms where they'd disarmed the devices, past the special weapons vault where Foster's evidence waited to be cataloged, past the main floor where Martinez and his conspirators sat in restraints, awaiting transport to the military police station. She stopped at Martinez's desk, where the Silver Star medal still sat where Bradley had placed it. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, running her thumb over the inscription one more time. Then she walked to the memorial board on the wall, where photographs of fallen soldiers from the base were displayed. Foster's photo was there, in uniform, smiling the way he always did when he thought nobody was watching. The official caption read, "Captain James Foster, killed in vehicle accident, devoted soldier and family man." Dakota pulled out a marker and added a single line, "Hero." She placed the medal on the small shelf beneath his photo, where it caught the light and seemed to glow. For a moment she could almost hear Foster's voice, the way he'd sounded in those last moments, determined despite the pain, focused on the mission even as his life ebbed away. "The evidence is in the walls. Don't let them win, Rivers. Don't let them make my death mean nothing." "It means everything, sir," Dakota said quietly. Mission complete. Colonel Patricia Brooks stood at the center of the base command post, like a conductor preparing for a symphony of justice. At 5'8", with silver streaking through her regulation-cut black hair, and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by human corruption, she commanded the room without raising her voice. The controlled chaos around her, technicians monitoring surveillance feeds, intelligence officers combing through data, military police coordinating arrests across 3 states. All of it moved to her rhythm. Dakota Rivers entered the command post, still soaking wet, her maintenance uniform clinging to her frame, water squelching in her boots with each step. She looked like she'd been through a car wash, which wasn't far from the truth. But her eyes were clear, focused, carrying the kind of satisfaction that came from a mission accomplished. Agent Rivers. Brooks turned from the bank of monitors, each showing different views of the Armory operation. "Outstanding work, though I have to ask, was triggering the sprinkler system part of your plan?" "That was Private Rodriguez, ma'am." Dakota accepted the towel offered by an aide. Quick thinking on her part. Diffused the immediate tension and gave us the distraction we needed. Brooks nodded approvingly. "I want her commendation on my desk by end of day." She gestured to the main screen, which showed a map of the United States with red markers at 12 different military installations. "But first, we need to discuss what Williams gave you. The flash drive." Dakota pulled the drive from her pocket, having sealed it in a waterproof evidence bag during the evacuation. Before she could hand it over, the door burst open and Brigadier General Thomas Hayes entered, his face flushed with anger and exertion, despite the early morning hour. "Colonel Brooks, what the hell is going on? I've got a weapons depot in flames, an armory in lockdown, and half the base thinking we're under attack." He stopped when he saw Dakota, his eyes narrowing. "And who is this?" "General Hayes," Brooks said smoothly. "May I introduce Chief Warrant Officer Dakota Rivers, Criminal Investigation Division, Special Operations. She's been undercover for the past 3 months investigating the weapons smuggling operation we briefed you about." Hayes's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "We? I was never briefed about any operation." Brooks and Dakota exchanged glances. "Sir, I personally sent you 3 memorandums about this investigation. The last one was dated 5 days ago, requesting authorization for the sting operation. I never received any memorandums." Hayes pulled out his phone, scrolling through his emails. "Nothing from you in the past month except routine reports." Dakota was already working on her tablet, pulling up network logs. "General, who handles your administrative email filtering?" "My aide, Major Donovan. He's been with me for 2 years. Completely trustworthy." Brooks picked up her secure phone. "I need Major Donovan located and detained immediately. Use caution. He may be armed." "You can't just arrest my aide," Hayes protested. "On what grounds?" Dakota turned her tablet to show Hayes the network logs. "Major Donovan has been intercepting and deleting specific emails from your inbox, sir. Anything related to the weapons investigation." She pulled up another screen. "He's also been copying your signature on forged documents authorizing ammunition transfers. Look at this authorization from last Tuesday. Did you sign this?" Hayes studied the document, his face paling. "That's my signature, but I I was in Washington last Tuesday. Digital forensics shows the signature was lifted from a different document and placed onto this one. Dakota explained. Donovan has been facilitating the smuggling operation from inside your office. He's been Martinez's insurance policy. The general sank into a chair, the weight of the betrayal visible on his face. 2 years. He's been in my house, met my family. With respect, sir, Dakota said gently, this is bigger than one aide or one sergeant. We're looking at a coordinated network across multiple bases. Foster discovered part of it, but he was killed before he could expose the full scope. That flash drive contains everything: names, dates, transactions, even recordings of conversations. Brooks took the drive and inserted it into a secure terminal. The screen immediately populated with files, hundreds of them, organized by date and location. The level of detail was staggering. Williams was more thorough than we thought. Brooks murmured, scrolling through the data. Look at this. Bank records, shipping manifests, even satellite imagery of weapons being loaded onto cartel trucks. How many people are involved? Hayes asked, his voice hollow. Dakota pulled up a network diagram on her tablet. Based on preliminary analysis, we're looking at least 42 active participants across 12 installations. That doesn't include civilian contractors, transportation companies, or cartel members. The total network probably involves over 200 people. The command post fell silent as the magnitude of the conspiracy sank in. This wasn't just a few bad soldiers making poor choices. This was a systematic infiltration of the military supply chain, orchestrated with the kind of precision usually reserved for special operations. How did Foster figure it out? Hayes asked finally. Dakota pulled up Foster's personnel file on one of the monitors. He noticed patterns: ammunition shipments that were logged but never arrived, weapons reported as training losses that showed up in cartel raids, serial numbers that appeared in multiple places at once. He was brilliant at seeing connections others missed. Brooks added, he came to us 6 months before he died, said he had evidence of a conspiracy but needed more time to identify all the players. We assigned Rivers as his handler, gave him whatever support we could while maintaining his cover. But someone leaked his identity. Dakota's voice hardened. 3 days before he was supposed to deliver his evidence to a grand jury, his vehicle went off a mountain road. The official investigation called it an accident, driver error, bad weather, tragic but not suspicious. But Foster had sent me a message that morning. He said Martinez had confronted him, knew about the investigation. You think Martinez killed him? Dakota shook her head. Martinez doesn't have those skills, but Williams does. Trained in improvised devices, familiar with vehicle systems. I think Martinez identified the threat and Williams eliminated it. The secure phone on Brooks's desk rang. She listened for a moment, then her expression darkened. Major Donovan's been located. He's barricaded himself in the communications center with 2 hostages. He's demanding safe passage off base and $10 million. Hayes stood up, his command presence reasserting itself. Not happening. I want SWAT positioned immediately. No one threatens my people. Sir, Dakota interjected, if we go in hard, we risk losing critical intelligence. Donovan has been running communications for this network. He knows things Williams and Martinez don't. We need him alive. What do you suggest? Let me talk to him. Dakota was already moving toward the door. I've been undercover for 3 months. He doesn't know who I really am. To him, I'm just maintenance. Non-threatening. Brooks caught her arm. Rivers, you just exposed yourself to Martinez's entire cell. The whole base knows who you are by now. Not necessarily. The armory's been in lockdown. No communications in or out except emergency channels. If Donovan's been in the comm center, he might not know what happened yet. It's too risky, Hayes said. I won't authorize it. Dakota turned to face him fully. General, with respect, James Foster was my friend. He died trying to expose this network. His wife is raising 2 daughters alone because he chose duty over safety. I owe him this. I owe them this. Let me finish what he started. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have 15 minutes. If you can't resolve it by then, SWAT goes in. The communications center was a squat, concrete building, hardened against electromagnetic pulses, and designed to maintain base communications even under attack. It was also, Dakota reflected as she approached, essentially a fortress with only 2 entrances, both of which could be sealed from the inside. Military police had established a perimeter, weapons drawn but not aimed, maintaining that delicate balance between readiness and provocation. The lead officer, Captain Michelle Stewart, met Dakota at the command vehicle. "He's got 2 specialists in there with him," Stewart reported. "Young kids, probably don't even know what's happening. He's armed with at least a sidearm, possibly more. He's disabled the internal cameras, so we're blind. What about external communications? He's locked down everything except one emergency channel. Says he'll only negotiate through that." Dakota studied the building layout on Stewart's tablet. There's a maintenance access tunnel that runs under the building, part of the old Cold War infrastructure. It comes up inside the server room. That's on the opposite side from where he's holed up, Stewart pointed out. And the tunnel hasn't been used in years. It's probably flooded. "Perfect." Dakota smiled grimly. "No one will expect an approach from there. I'll need a waterproof radio and a flashlight. And someone needs to keep Donovan talking, focused on the main entrance. You're really going in there alone? I've been wet once today already." Dakota checked her watch. 14 minutes. Better get moving. The maintenance tunnel was worse than flooded. It was a nightmare of rust, mold, and water that came up to Dakota's waist. The flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness, reflecting off the oily surface and creating shadows that seemed to move independently. Every step stirred up sediment that had been accumulating for decades, releasing smells that made her eyes water. But Dakota had been in worse places. Caves in Afghanistan where the air was so thin you could barely breathe. Sewers in Iraq where one wrong turn meant death. This was just unpleasant, not lethal. The tunnel stretched for 200 meters, turning twice before reaching the access point beneath the server room. The ladder leading up was more rust than metal, several rungs missing entirely. Dakota tested each one before putting her full weight on it, knowing that a fall here would mean mission failure and possibly worse. Above, she could hear voices. Donovan's raised in anger, someone else pleading. The hostages. Young soldiers who'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, whose only crime was showing up for their shift. The access hatch was sealed with rust and age, requiring Dakota to brace herself and push with everything she had. It gave way with a shriek of metal that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. She froze, waiting to see if anyone had heard, but the voices continued, unchanged. She emerged into the server room like something from a horror movie, soaked, covered in rust and mold, water streaming from her uniform. The room was dark except for the LED lights on the servers, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. Through the glass door, she could see into the main communications center where Donovan had barricaded himself. Major Donovan was everything a staff officer should be. Tall, clean-cut, with the kind of square jaw that looked good in official photos. But stress had taken its toll. His uniform was disheveled, sweat stains visible even from distance. He paced back and forth, gesturing wildly with a pistol while 2 young specialists sat against the wall, hands on their heads. Dakota keyed her radio, whispering, "I'm in position. Keep him focused on the main entrance." Stewart's voice came back immediately. "Roger. Initiating contact now." The phone in the communications center rang. Donovan snatched it up, his voice carrying through the glass. "I told you my demands. Safe passage and $10 million. You have 10 minutes or these kids die." While Donovan focused on the phone, Dakota moved through the server room to the connecting door. It was locked, but she'd come prepared. The lockpicks Foster had given her 3 years ago, a joke gift at the time, presented with a laugh and a comment about her needing to learn some real spy skills, worked perfectly. The door opened silently. Dakota stepped into the main room, still dripping, looking like she'd crawled out of a swamp. One of the hostages saw her first, his eyes widening, but she pressed a finger to her lips, and he stayed silent. "Major Donovan," she said calmly. Donovan spun around, the pistol swinging toward her. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and fear in the span of seconds. You're You're the maintenance clerk. From the motor pool. That's right. Dakota kept her hands visible, moving slowly into the room. I'm just maintenance, nobody important. But I can help you. Stay back. Donovan's hand was shaking now, the pistol wavering between Dakota and the hostages. You don't understand what's happening here. I understand more than you think. Dakota took another step forward. Martinez's cell has been exposed. The armory's in lockdown. Williams is in custody. It's over, Major. But it doesn't have to end badly for you. They'll kill me. Donovan's voice cracked. You don't know these people, what they're capable of. Actually, I do. Dakota pulled out her CID badge, letting it catch the light. I've been tracking them for 3 years. I know about the cartel connections. I know about the blackmail. I know about Foster. She paused, watching his reaction to the name. And I know you didn't want him dead. Donovan's arm dropped slightly, the pistol now pointing at the floor. I tried to warn him, sent him anonymous messages telling him to stop digging, but he wouldn't listen, because he was a good soldier. Dakota moved closer, now within arm's reach. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him everything. She held out her hand. You can still do the right thing, Major. Help us stop this network. Help us save lives. They have videos. Donovan's voice was barely a whisper. From Thailand. Things that would destroy my career, my marriage, everything. Your career is already over, Dakota said, gently but firmly. Your marriage might survive if you're honest. Your life definitely will if you cooperate. But those 2 kids you're holding, they have nothing to do with this. They're just like Foster's daughters. Innocent people caught in someone else's war. Let them go. Donovan looked at the hostages, seeming to see them clearly for the first time. One couldn't be more than 19, fresh out of training. The other was maybe 21, with a wedding ring that looked new. Both were terrified, but trying to hide it with military bearing. The pistol clattered to the floor. Dakota kicked it away and immediately moved to check on the hostages. You're safe now. Get outside. Get checked by medical. Go. They didn't need to be told twice. Both soldiers scrambled to their feet and ran for the exit, leaving Dakota alone with Donovan, who had collapsed into a chair, head in his hands. 3 years, he said, not looking up. 3 years of living with this. Knowing what I was doing was wrong, but not seeing any way out. They own so many people, Rivers. You have no idea how deep this goes. Then tell me. Dakota pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. Start from the beginning. Every name, every transaction, every threat. This is your chance to make things right. Donovan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and shame. It started in Thailand, a conference on logistics management. They knew I was there, knew my weaknesses, the girls they sent. I thought they were but they were so young, too young, and they filmed everything. Dakota kept her expression neutral, though internally she was disgusted. Honey traps were an old technique, but using underage victims crossed every line. When did they first contact you? 6 months later, after I'd been assigned as Hayes's aide. They had the videos, said they'd release them unless I cooperated. Just small things at first, scheduling changes, meeting reports, nothing classified. But then Foster started his investigation. Donovan nodded miserably. They wanted to know everything he was doing, who he was talking to, what evidence he'd found. I tried to feed them false information, delay them, but Martinez had other sources. When Foster wouldn't stop, when he wouldn't take the warnings, Williams killed him. The major nodded, tears now flowing freely. Made it look like an accident. I didn't know until after. They called me that night, said it was done, said I was an accessory now, said if I ever tried to leave, I'd join him. Dakota activated her recorder. Major Donovan, I need you to state for the record everything you just told me. Names, dates, locations, everything. For the next hour, Donovan talked. He gave up names of cartel contacts, identified military personnel involved in the network, revealed drop locations and payment methods. He detailed how weapons were diverted, how serial numbers were changed, how investigations were derailed. It was a masterclass in organized crime, Military Edition. By the time he finished, Dakota had filled 3 digital files with evidence, enough to bring down not just the network, but to fundamentally change how military supplies were tracked and secured. Brooks's voice came over the radio. "Rivers, we've heard everything. MPs are standing by to take Donovan into custody. Outstanding work." Dakota stood, looking down at the broken major. Foster had 2 daughters, 8 and 11. They're going to grow up without their father because of this network. What do you think should happen to the people responsible? Donovan couldn't meet her eyes. "I'll testify. Against everyone. It won't bring him back, but maybe it means something." The military police entered then, professional and efficient, reading Donovan his rights as they cuffed him and led him away. Dakota watched them go, feeling the weight of the moment. 3 months of pretending to be someone else, of watching and waiting, of honoring Foster's memory by completing his mission. It was over. Or at least, this part was. The base detention facility was a stark contrast to the chaos of the morning. Clean white walls, fluorescent lighting that never dimmed, and the kind of oppressive silence that made every footstep echo like a gunshot. Dakota Rivers walked down the corridor flanked by 2 military police officers, though whether they were escorting her or protecting the prisoners from her was unclear. Martinez sat in the interrogation room like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. His uniform was still damp from the sprinklers, his sergeant stripes looking somehow diminished under the harsh lights. When Dakota entered, he didn't look up. 300 people, Dakota said, setting a tablet on the table between them. That's how many would have died if your bombs had detonated, including 17 civilians who were scheduled for a base tour this morning, kids from the local elementary school. Martinez's hands clenched on the table. "I didn't know about the tour." "You didn't know a lot of things, apparently." Dakota pulled up financial records on the tablet, like the fact that the cartel was using you to fund human trafficking operations. Those weapons you sold? They weren't just for drug wars. They were used to control trafficking routes from Mexico to Canada. Children, Martinez, some as young as 12. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes wide with horror. No, they said it was just about territory, about drug routes. Dakota slid a photograph across the table. It showed a shipping container filled with weapons. Weapons whose serial numbers matched ones Martinez had reported as training losses. The container had been intercepted at the border, but not before its previous cargo had been delivered. 23 young women, all under 18, all sold into slavery. Martinez stared at the photo like it was a live snake. I never wanted. What you wanted stopped mattering the moment you took their money. Dakota's voice was ice. But here's your chance to do something right. The network Williams described has cells we haven't identified yet. Help us find them, and maybe those kids you helped put in danger get a chance at freedom. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with how you were recruited. Martinez rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture somehow making him look smaller. It was 5 years ago. I was stationed at Fort Campbell, going through a divorce. Legal fees were killing me, child support payments I couldn't make. The first offer came through a civilian contractor named Rodriguez. Not related to the private, different guy entirely. He said he knew people who needed military equipment. Nothing major, just surplus stuff that was going to be destroyed anyway. How much was the first payment? $5,000. Cash. Martinez laughed bitterly. Seemed like so much money at the time. Enough to catch up on bills, keep my ex from taking me to court. But then they wanted more. Said I was in it now, might as well make real money. $10,000 for the next shipment. $20,000 for the one after that. When did you realize it was the cartel? When they sent me a video of my kids playing at their school in El Paso. No message, no threat, just the video. The meaning was clear. I was theirs or my children paid the price. Dakota made notes on her tablet. Who else from Campbell came here with you? Williams, obviously. Chen and Thompson were recruited later, here at Garrison. Garcia. Garcia was different. He had gambling debts, owed the wrong people in Vegas. The cartel bought his markers, told him he could work it off or end up in the desert. What about officers? This network couldn't function with just enlisted personnel. Martinez hesitated, and Dakota could see him weighing loyalties against survival. There's a lieutenant colonel at Fort Knox, Davidson. He coordinates transportation. Make sure shipments don't get inspected too closely. And a major at Fort Liberty, Blackstone. She handles the paperwork. Make sure serial numbers disappear from the system. She? Dakota's eyebrows rose slightly. Jennifer Blackstone? You know her? Dakota knew her all right. They'd served together in Afghanistan, before Blackstone had been promoted and transferred. She'd been at Foster's funeral, had given a speech about honor and sacrifice that had made everyone cry. The betrayal stung deeper than Dakota wanted to admit. What about here at Garrison? Besides Donovan, who else? Martinez looked at the one-way mirror, knowing that others were watching and recording. The base commander's secretary, Specialist Tran. She's been feeding them information about investigations, warning them when inspections were coming. And, he paused, swallowing hard, the chaplain's assistant, Corporal Reeves. They use him to identify soldiers with problems, ones who might be vulnerable to recruitment. Dakota felt her stomach turn. The chaplain's assistant would have access to confidential counseling information, knowledge of who was struggling with finances, addiction, family problems. It was a perfect recruitment tool wrapped in a violation of everything sacred about military service. Before she could respond, her radio crackled to life. Agent Rivers, we have a situation at the motor pool. You need to see this. She looked at Martinez one last time. You're going to write all of this down. Every name, every date, every transaction. And if you leave anything out, if you try to protect anyone, the deal's off. Understood? Martinez nodded, defeat written in every line of his body. The motor pool was still smoldering when Dakota arrived, the acrid smell of burned rubber and melted plastic hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. Fire suppression teams had managed to contain the blaze, but not before 6 Humvees and 2 supply trucks had been reduced to blackened shells. The vehicles had been parked in a specific pattern, Dakota noticed, arranged to create maximum damage with minimum explosive material. Chief Bradley met her at the perimeter, his face grim. We found something you need to see. This way. He led her through the destruction to a section that had been partially shielded from the fire by a concrete barrier. There, hidden beneath what had been a maintenance vehicle, was a metal box, scarred by heat but intact. Military grade, fireproof, with a lock that had been cut by the forensics team. Inside were 3 hard drives and a handwritten note. Dakota recognized Foster's handwriting immediately, the careful block letters he'd always used for important documents. The note was brief. If you're reading this, I'm dead and you're continuing my work. These drives contain everything I couldn't put in official reports. The real network isn't just about weapons. Check the medical supplies. Check the pharmaceuticals. Follow the insulin. The insulin? Bradley looked confused. What does diabetes medication have to do with weapons smuggling? Dakota was already connecting dots in her mind. Military pharmacies stock massive amounts of insulin for dependent care. It's expensive, poorly tracked, and she pulled out her phone, checking market prices. Currently experiencing a shortage that's driving black market prices through the roof. So they're not just smuggling weapons? Weapons were the distraction. Dakota held up one of the hard drives. The real money is in medical supplies. Insulin, EpiPens, cancer medications. Anything that people will pay desperate prices for. She looked at Bradley. We need to check the base pharmacy inventory immediately. The base pharmacy was in lockdown when they arrived, standard procedure during any security incident. But the head pharmacist, Major Angela Torres, was already there, having been called in when the first discrepancies were noticed. She looked haggard, stressed, and very angry. 3 months. She said without preamble when Dakota and Bradley entered. Someone's been altering my inventory for 3 months, and I just found out this morning when I did an emergency audit. We're missing over $2 million in medications. What kind of medications? Dakota asked, though she suspected she already knew. Insulin, primarily. Both rapid-acting and long-term formulations. Also EpiPens, several cancer medications, and oddly enough, veterinary antibiotics. Veterinary? Torres pulled up records on her computer. Military working dog unit medications. Expensive stuff. Specialized antibiotics that work on both animals and humans. Someone's been ordering 3 times our normal amount and routing the excess. Somewhere. Dakota studied the records, noting the patterns. Let me guess. The orders were authorized by either Major Donovan or someone in the commander's office? Specialist Tran, actually. Torres highlighted several entries. She's been using the commander's authorization codes, but the actual entries were made from her workstation. Bradley whistled low. This is bigger than just weapons. They've turned the entire base into a criminal enterprise. Dakota's phone buzzed. Colonel Brooks needed her immediately. As she turned to leave, Torres called out, "Agent Rivers, how long has this been happening? Not just here, but everywhere." Dakota paused at the door. Based on what we're learning, years, maybe a decade. Foster stumbled onto part of it, but he was killed before he could see the full picture. The command post had transformed into something resembling a war room. Additional personnel had been brought in, specialists in everything from financial crimes to cyber warfare. Multiple screens showed real-time operations at bases across the country, as military police conducted simultaneous raids based on the intelligence from Martinez and Donovan's confessions. Colonel Brooks stood at the center of it all, coordinating with a phone in each hand. When she saw Dakota, she handed off both calls and pulled her aside. "We have a problem. Specialist Tran is missing. Left her post 2 hours ago. Told her supervisor she was feeling sick. Her car's gone, apartment's empty, and she cleaned out her bank account this morning. She was warned," Dakota said immediately. "Someone in this room is still part of the network." Brooks's expression hardened. "That's what I'm afraid of. I've initiated a communications blackout, but if there's still a mole—" "Ma'am," Dakota interrupted, looking at one of the screens showing Fort Knox. "That raid on Lieutenant Colonel Davidson. When was it scheduled?" 15 minutes ago. Why?" Dakota grabbed a secure phone, dialing rapidly. Because if Tran was warned, then Davidson was too. And if he runs. The line connected. "This is Agent Rivers, CID. Abort the approach on Davidson. Establish a perimeter but do not enter. Possible IED threat." On the screen, they watched the Fort Knox team pull back, just as the front door of Davidson's house exploded outward, the blast strong enough to shatter windows 3 houses away. If the team had been at the door, they would all be dead. Brooks grabbed the phone. "All units, all locations. Assume targets have been warned. Approach with extreme caution. Expect traps and resistance." Dakota was already working on her tablet, pulling up base personnel records. Who had access to the raid schedule? Brooks checked her own records. 12 people, all verified, all cleared by Pentagon security. "Then we're looking at this wrong." Dakota pulled up a different screen, showing communication logs. "Someone doesn't need access if they're monitoring our communications directly." She highlighted several anomalies in the data stream. There, encrypted packets being sent from our system to an external server every time we update the operation board. Someone's streaming our plans in real time? Dakota traced the packets back to their source, her expression darkening. The signals originating from the base IT center, from a terminal assigned to Sergeant First Class Patricia Wu. Brooks finished, reading over her shoulder. "She's been here 6 years, perfect record, commendations for cybersecurity work," which put her in the perfect position to be the network's eyes and ears. Dakota was already moving. "We need to get to the IT center now. If she's still there, she might be trying to destroy evidence." They took a security team, approaching the IT center with the kind of caution usually reserved for combat zones. The building looked normal from the outside, no signs of disturbance, but Dakota noticed something that made her stomach clench. The parking lot was empty except for one car. Wu's. "She's still here," Bradley said, checking his weapon. "Why hasn't she run?" "Because she's not done yet." Dakota pulled up the building schematics on her tablet. The IT center houses the backup servers for the entire base network. If she destroys those, we lose all evidence of the network's communications. Brooks finished. "Everything they've sent through our systems for years. They entered through separate doors, converging on the main server room where Wu would most likely be. The hallways were dark, emergency lighting only, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every door they passed was locked, sealed from the central control room where Wu had barricaded herself. When they reached the server room, they could hear it. The systematic destruction of hardware, the crash of drives being physically destroyed, the hiss of thermal charges melting circuit boards. Wu was being thorough, methodical, erasing years of evidence with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this day. "Sergeant Wu, this is Colonel Brooks. Open this door immediately. That's a direct order." The destruction sounds continued without pause. Dakota studied the door, reinforced steel with electronic locks. "We're not getting through this without heavy equipment." Bradley held up a fire axe from the emergency station. "We go old school." It took 12 swings to break through. Bradley and another soldier alternating strikes while Dakota watched the security feed on her tablet, tracking Wu's movement through the server room. When the door finally gave way, they rushed in to find Wu standing amid the devastation, surrounded by destroyed servers and melted drives. She was holding a thermite grenade, pin already pulled, her finger the only thing keeping the spoon in place. "One more step and I drop this." Wu's voice was calm, almost serene. "Everything burns. Every record, every file, every piece of evidence you think you have." Dakota stepped forward anyway. "You've already destroyed the local servers. Dropping that grenade won't change anything except adding murder charges to your treason." Wu smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. "You think this is just about covering tracks? This is about sending a message. The network survives. It adapts. You cut off one head, 2 more appear. Foster learned that the hard way." "You knew Foster?" "I processed his intel reports, filtered them, edited them, made sure the dangerous ones never reached anyone important." Wu shifted the grenade to her other hand, her grip still firm. He was so naive, thinking the system would protect him if he just followed the rules. The system would have, if you hadn't corrupted it. Wu laughed, bitter and sharp. "The system was corrupted long before I got here. I just took advantage of existing weaknesses. Do you know how easy it was? How many people were willing to look the other way for a little extra money? Your precious military isn't some shining beacon of honor. It's just people, flawed, greedy, desperate people." Dakota took another step forward. "You're right, people are flawed. But most of them try to do better. Foster tried. He died trying. And his death means something because we're here now, stopping you." "Stopping me?" Wu gestured at the destroyed servers. "I've already won. Without these records, you can't prove the full extent of the network. Sure, you'll get Martinez and Donovan and a few others, but the real players, the ones who matter, they're already gone." "Actually," Dakota held up her tablet, showing a live feed from another location. "They're not. You see, Foster was smarter than you gave him credit for. He didn't trust the base servers, knew someone might be monitoring them. So he set up his own backup system, off-site, completely isolated from military networks. Every communication you thought you were filtering, every report you edited, he had copies sent to a civilian server farm in Denver." Wu's confidence cracked for the first time. "That's impossible. I monitored all his communications." "You monitored his military communications. But Foster had friends in the private sector, cybersecurity specialists who owed him favors. They've been collecting everything for 3 years, waiting for someone to ask for it." Dakota smiled. "I asked for it this morning." The grenade shook in Wu's hand. "You're lying." Colonel Brooks held up her phone, showing a message from the Pentagon. 17 arrests confirmed, based on Foster's backup intel. 3 more in progress. Network command structure compromised. Operation successful. Wu stared at the phone, then at the grenade in her hand. The weight of her failure seemed to physically crush her, shoulders slumping, the fight draining from her eyes. "Sergeant Wu." Dakota's voice was gentle now. "Put the grenade down. It's over. Don't add suicide to your crimes. You have family who need you to survive this, even if it's from behind bars." "My family." Wu's voice broke. "They'll never forgive me. My daughter. She's at West Point. She wanted to be like me, serve with honor. What do I tell her? The truth. That you lost your way but found it again at the end. That you chose to live and face justice instead of taking the coward's way out. For a long moment, the server room was silent, except for the hum of surviving equipment and the distant sound of sirens. Then, slowly, carefully, Wu set the grenade on the floor and stepped back, hands raised. Bradley moved in quickly, securing the device while other soldiers restrained Wu. As they led her away, she looked back at Dakota one last time. "Foster sent me a message before he died," Wu said quietly. "Just one line. Tell Rivers. The walls have ears, but the sky remembers." I never understood what it meant. Dakota felt her breath catch. It was a code phrase Foster had developed, referring to satellite surveillance records that existed outside military control. If he'd sent that message, it meant... She pulled out her phone, dialing a number from memory. "This is Rivers. I need you to check the civilian satellite coverage for grid reference 37 November, 58 Whiskey, from 3 years ago. October 15th, between 0200 and 0600 hours. The voice on the other end was efficient, professional. "Checking now. Yes, we have coverage. Commercial imaging satellite passed over those coordinates at 0317 hours. Resolution is limited, but... Wait, there's something here. Multiple vehicles at what should be an empty training area. And, Agent Rivers, one of those vehicles matches the description of Captain Foster's car. Send me everything. Now." The satellite imagery arrived on her tablet within minutes. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough to show what had really happened that night. Foster's vehicle hadn't gone off the road by accident. It had been forced off by 2 other vehicles, pushed systematically until physics took over. And standing beside one of those vehicles, visible despite the poor resolution, was a figure Dakota recognized. She showed the image to Brooks. "That's Lieutenant Colonel Davidson. He was there. He murdered Foster personally." Brooks studied the image, her expression grim. "This is evidence of murder, conspiracy, and treason. With this, we can charge him with capital crimes, if we can find him. His house is empty, remember?" Dakota was already thinking, piecing together fragments of intelligence from 3 years of investigation. Davidson had a cabin in Montana, off the books, purchased through a shell company Foster had been investigating. If he was going to ground... "Get me a tactical team," Dakota said, "and a helicopter. We're ending this today." Chapter 4. The Resolution. The helicopter carved through the Montana sky like a blade through silk, mountains rising beneath them and jagged peaks that caught the afternoon sun. Dakota sat with the tactical team, studying satellite imagery of Davidson's cabin on her tablet. It was isolated, accessible only by a single dirt road or by air, surrounded by forest that would provide excellent cover for an escape or an ambush. "He's had 3 hours head start." The team leader, Captain Marcus Webb, observed. He could be long gone, or he could be waiting. Dakota zoomed in on the imagery. "Look at the terrain. If he runs, where does he go? The nearest town is 60 miles away. He's either planning to fight, or he's got an extraction plan we don't know about." Webb nodded, already adjusting their approach strategy. "We'll insert here, 2 clicks out, approach on foot. Less chance of detection." Dakota's radio crackled with Brooks's voice. "Rivers, we've just received intel from DEA. They've been tracking unusual aircraft movements in that area. Private planes, filed flight plans that don't match their actual routes. The cartel," Dakota said immediately. "They're extracting him. When's the next window?" "Based on patterns, within the next 2 hours. You need to move fast." The helicopter touched down in a small clearing, the team spreading out immediately into a defensive perimeter. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that made experienced operators nervous. Dakota took point with Webb, her weapon ready but her mind focused on what they might find at the cabin. They moved through the trees like ghosts, using hand signals instead of radios, every sense alert for traps or sensors. Davidson was special forces before he went into logistics, trained in exactly this kind of warfare. If he'd had time to prepare, the explosion came from their left, far enough away not to be lethal, but close enough to announce their presence. A tree burst into flames, obviously triggered by a tripwire or pressure plate. He knows we're here, Webb observed unnecessarily. Dakota studied the burning tree, noting the placement, the type of explosive used. That's not meant to kill, it's meant to hurt us. He wants us to approach from a specific direction. So we don't. She pulled up the topographical map on her tablet. There's a ravine on the eastern approach, difficult terrain, but it puts us above the cabin with a clear sight line. It took an extra 30 minutes to circle around. 30 minutes where Davidson could be destroying evidence, calling for help, or setting up additional defenses. But when they finally crested the ridge above the cabin, Dakota knew they'd made the right choice. The cabin sat in a small valley, picturesque and isolated, the kind of place someone might go to fish or hunt or escape the world. But through her binoculars, Dakota could see the additions that made it more than a retreat. Solar panels for off-grid power, satellite communication equipment, and what looked like reinforced walls designed to withstand small arms fire. Davidson was visible through a window, moving rapidly between rooms, clearly packing. A burn barrel outside was already smoking, documents being destroyed even as they watched. "We need those documents," Dakota said. Webb was already directing his team into position. Two-pronged approach, half from the front to draw attention, half from the rear to secure evidence. Non-lethal if possible, but all force authorized if he resists. Dakota wanted to go with the assault team, wanted to be there when Davidson was confronted with his crimes, but Webb held her back. "You're the investigating officer. Your testimony will be crucial. You can't be part of the arrest." So she watched through binoculars as the team moved in, professional and efficient, surrounding the cabin in seconds. The front door breach was textbook, flashbang followed by rapid entry. She heard shouting, commands to get down, the crash of furniture, then silence. Webb's voice came over the radio. "Target secure, no resistance. But Rivers, you need to see this." The cabin's interior was a testament to paranoia and guilt. Every wall was covered with maps, photographs, documents, creating a maze of conspiracy that told the story of the network in devastating detail. Foster's photo was there, marked with a red X, surrounded by surveillance shots that showed Davidson had been tracking him for months before the murder. But it was the desk that made Dakota's blood run cold. Spread across it were files on other investigators, other potential threats to the network. Her own photo was there, recent, taken outside her apartment. Brooks was there too, along with 6 other CID agents who were working various parts of the investigation. "He was planning to kill us all," Webb said, reading the notes attached to each photo. "Accidents, suicides, random crimes. He had a plan for everyone." Dakota picked up her own file, reading Davidson's neat handwriting. "Rivers, emotional, attached to Foster's memory. Suggests psychological pressure through Foster's family. Then staged suicide when she breaks." When they brought Davidson up from the basement where he'd been secured, Dakota had to restrain herself from immediate violence. He looked smaller than she remembered, older, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Not a killer, not a traitor. Just a tired-looking officer in civilian clothes. Agent Rivers. Davidson said calmly, as if they were meeting at a social function. "I wondered when you'd find me. You murdered Foster. I eliminated a threat to a critical operation." Davidson's tone was conversational, matter of fact. Foster was going to expose something that would have compromised national security. Dakota laughed, harsh and bitter. "National security? You were selling weapons to drug cartels." Davidson shook his head. "You really don't understand, do you? The weapons were just cover. The real operation was intelligence gathering. The cartel was providing information on terrorist cells operating through Mexico. Information that saved American lives. So you were a double agent, trading weapons for intel, trading weapons that were going to be destroyed anyway for information that prevented 3 terrorist attacks on American soil." Davidson looked directly at her. Foster's investigation would have exposed that operation, would have cost us critical assets, would have resulted in American deaths. Dakota felt the ground shifting under her feet. "You're saying this was sanctioned? That someone authorized you to run guns to the cartel?" "Not someone. Davidson pulled out a phone, showing her an encrypted message chain. The authorization came from very high up, higher than you can imagine. Foster was collateral damage in a much larger war. Dakota studied the messages, recognizing classification markers that suggested intelligence agency involvement. Even if that's true, Foster's murder was still a crime, and the network you were running went far beyond any authorized operation. The human trafficking, the medical supplies, the corruption of military personnel. That was Martinez and the others exceeding their mandate. Davidson's composure cracked slightly. I tried to control it, keep it focused, but they got greedy. The cartel started demanding more, threatening to expose the operation if we didn't comply. So you let it spiral out of control, let innocent people suffer, all to protect your operation? To protect America. Davidson's voice hardened. You think the world is black and white, good and evil. It's not. It's gray. Endless shades of gray. And sometimes you have to do horrible things to prevent worse things. Dakota thought of Foster's daughters, growing up without their father. Of the young women trafficked using weapons from American armories. Of the diabetics who couldn't afford insulin while military supplies were sold on the black market. Maybe the world is gray, she said finally. But Foster was right. He saw the evil being done in the name of security and tried to stop it. That's not black and white. That's just right. Davidson was taken away in restraints, but his words haunted Dakota as she processed the scene. How many other operations existed in those gray spaces? How many other Lieutenant Colonel Davidsons were out there, trading moral certainty for perceived security? Her phone rang. Brooks, calling from Garrison. Rivers, we have a situation. 3 more bases have reported similar networks. Phoenix, Seattle, Miami. All with connections to various cartels, all claiming some level of official sanction. The Pentagon is in crisis mode. What are my orders? Come back to Garrison. There's someone here who wants to talk to you. Someone from Washington. The flight back seemed both endless and too short. Dakota used the time to review everything they'd found, trying to piece together the full scope of what Foster had discovered. It was vast, interconnected, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of military logistics. But there were patterns, commonalities that suggested a central organizing principle. When the helicopter touched down at Garrison, a black SUV was waiting. Not military, Dakota noticed. Government plates but no unit markings. The driver said nothing, just opened the door and gestured for her to get in. They drove not to the command post but to a nondescript building on the edge of the base. One Dakota had always assumed was storage or administration. Inside, in a conference room that could have belonged to any corporate office, sat a woman Dakota recognized from intelligence briefings, but had never met in person. Deputy Director Sarah Chen, CIA, Agent Rivers. Chen stood, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. We need to discuss what you've uncovered. You mean the network? Or the fact that parts of it were apparently sanctioned by your agency? Chen's expression didn't change. Both, actually. Please, sit. This will take some time to explain. Over the next hour, Chen laid out a story that made Dakota's head spin. Yes, there had been authorized operations trading weapons for intelligence. Yes, Davidson had been part of that. But the corruption, the expansion into human trafficking and medical supplies, that had been unintended consequences of giving criminals access to military resources. We lost control, Chen admitted. What started as a focused intelligence operation became a criminal enterprise. Foster's investigation threatened to expose not just the criminals, but the legitimate operations as well. Some people, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Some people decided it was better to silence Foster than risk exposure. Some people like Davidson? Davidson was a convenient tool, nothing more. The real authorization came from someone who's no longer in a position to face consequences. Dead? Promoted. Chen's smile was bitter, beyond the reach of justice, at least earthly justice. So what happens now? The network is exposed. Dozens of people are under arrest. But the people who really authorize this just walk away? Not exactly. Chen pulled out a folder, sliding it across to Dakota. We want you to continue Foster's work, officially as part of a joint task force between CID and CIA. Your mission would be to identify and eliminate these gray operations, ensure they don't spiral out of control like this one did. You want me to be your internal affairs? I want you to be what Foster was trying to be, a check on power, a voice for justice in a world that often forgets what that word means. Dakota stared at the folder, knowing that opening it would change her life forever. She thought of Foster, of his dedication to truth, of the price he'd paid for it. What about his family, his wife and daughters? Full benefits, plus a special compensation package, college funds for both girls. And, Chen paused, we're recommending Foster for the Distinguished Intelligence Cross. Posthumously, of course, but it would recognize his service and sacrifice. He deserves more than medals. Yes, Chen agreed, he does. But medals are what we have to give. Dakota opened the folder. Inside were details of 6 more operations, all in that gray space between legal and illegal, all potential sources of corruption and abuse. It would take years to investigate them all, years of dangerous, thankless work that might end the same way Foster's had. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it. Elena Rodriguez, the private who stood up during the Armory incident. I want her on my team. She's got the kind of moral courage this work requires. Chen smiled. Done. Anyone else? Chief Bradley, if he'll take the assignment. And I want access to all of Foster's files, not just the ones you think are relevant. That might be difficult. Then this might be difficult for me to accept. Dakota closed the folder. Foster died because information was compartmentalized, because the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. If I'm going to do this, I do it with full transparency, at least within my team. Chen considered this for a long moment. I'll have to make some calls, but I think we can arrange that. As Dakota stood to leave, Chen called after her. Agent Rivers? Why did Foster trust you? Of all the people he could have given that medal to, why you? Dakota thought of their last conversation. Foster, bleeding out in her arms while she tried desperately to keep him alive, his words growing weaker with each breath. Because I promised him something. What? That his death would mean something. That the truth would come out, no matter how long it took or how much it cost. Dakota looked back at Chen. I keep my promises. Epilogue. The reckoning's end. 6 weeks later, Dakota stood in Arlington National Cemetery, watching as Foster's memorial stone was updated with his new honors. The Distinguished Intelligence Cross gleamed in the afternoon sun, the highest honor the intelligence community could bestow. His widow, Margaret, stood beside her, both daughters holding their mother's hands. He would have hated all this fuss. Margaret said quietly, a sad smile on her face. Yes, Dakota agreed, but he would have loved knowing that his work continued, that people were still fighting for what he believed in. The older daughter, Sarah, looked up at Dakota. Mom says you were with Dad when he died, that you tried to save him. Dakota knelt down to the girl's level. I was, and he was very brave. He was thinking of you and your sister and your mom right until the end. Did he say anything? The younger daughter, Amy, asked. For us? He said. Dakota's voice caught slightly. He said to tell you that heroes aren't the people who don't get scared. Heroes are the people who get scared but do the right thing anyway. And that you should always, always do the right thing, even when it's hard. Margaret squeezed Dakota's shoulder. Thank you. For everything. For finishing what he started. As they walked away from the grave, Dakota's phone buzzed. New intelligence, new operations to investigate, new corruptions to expose. The work never ended. But that was okay. Foster had known that when he started down this path, had accepted it, had died for it. The sun was setting over Arlington, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded Dakota of fire, of destruction, but also of purification. The network had been burned out, the corruption exposed, the guilty facing justice. It wasn't perfect justice, it never was, but it was something. Her new team was waiting for her at Quantico. Elena Rodriguez, eager and idealistic. Chief Bradley, experienced and cautious. A few others, carefully selected for their skills and, more importantly, their integrity. They would continue Foster's work, hunting the shadows where corruption bred, ensuring that those who served with honor weren't betrayed by those who didn't. As she reached her car, Dakota turned back to look at Foster's grave one last time. The metal caught the dying light, sending reflections across the carefully maintained grass. Other visitors were placing flowers on other graves, other heroes who had paid the ultimate price for their service. "Rest easy, Captain," she said quietly. "We've got the watch now." Her phone rang. Brooks, with news of another situation, another crisis that needed investigation. Dakota answered, already shifting back into operational mode. But as she drove away from Arlington, she carried with her the weight of Foster's legacy and the promise she'd made. The truth would always come out, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of the network's destruction became clear. 47 military personnel arrested across 15 bases. Over $300 million in stolen equipment and supplies recovered. 12 cartel operations disrupted, resulting in the rescue of over 100 trafficking victims. But perhaps more importantly, the investigation had exposed fundamental weaknesses in military logistics and oversight. New protocols were implemented, including regular rotation of supply personnel, mandatory financial audits, and enhanced surveillance of sensitive materials. The Foster Protocols, they came to be called, though few knew the full story behind the name. Dakota's new task force operated from a nondescript office building in Virginia, their existence known only to a handful of officials with the highest clearances. They investigated the gray spaces, the operations that walked the line between necessary and criminal. Sometimes they found heroes doing difficult work. Sometimes they found villains hiding behind classification stamps. Elena Rodriguez proved to be an invaluable asset. Her combination of technical skills and moral clarity, cutting through bureaucratic obfuscation. Bradley brought decades of experience and a network of contacts that opened doors Dakota couldn't access alone. 3 months into their operation, they received intelligence about a similar network operating in the Pacific Fleet. Weapons and supplies disappearing from naval bases, ending up in the hands of pirates and terrorists. The investigation would take them from Pearl Harbor to Yokosuka, from Singapore to Dubai. As Dakota prepared for the deployment, she found herself thinking of Martinez, now serving 25 years in Leavenworth. He'd written her a letter, apologizing again, saying he was trying to help other inmates avoid the mistakes he'd made. It didn't forgive his crimes, but it was something. Thompson and Chen had turned state's evidence, their testimony helping to convict dozens of others. They would serve time, but less than they might have, a deal that sat uncomfortably with Dakota, but was necessary for the greater good. Williams had tried to commit suicide in his cell, unable to face the shame of his actions. He'd survived, barely, and was now in psychiatric treatment. The medical testimony at his trial revealed severe PTSD from multiple deployments, untreated and exacerbated by the pressure of his criminal activities. It didn't excuse his crimes, but it highlighted another failure in the system: the lack of mental health support for returning veterans. Garcia had provided the most valuable intelligence, his detailed knowledge of bomb-making helping to identify and prevent 3 terrorist attacks that had been planning to use similar devices. His cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence and placement in protective custody, the cartel having put a price on his head. Major Donovan faced the harshest sentence outside of Davidson, 30 years for treason, with no possibility of parole. The videos from Thailand were never made public, a small mercy for his family, but his betrayal of General Hayes and his role in Foster's death sealed his fate. Specialist Tran had been caught trying to cross into Mexico, carrying flash drives with classified information she'd hoped to trade for protection. Her arrest had led to the identification of 3 more moles in military intelligence, a network within the network that had been selling secrets to the highest bidder. Sergeant Wu received 20 years, her expertise in cyber warfare making her too dangerous for anything less than maximum security. The destruction she'd caused to the base servers had been significant, but not total. Foster's off-site backups had preserved the most critical evidence. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson faced the death penalty for Foster's murder, though his lawyers were arguing for life imprisonment based on his claims of authorized action. The trial would be held in military court, closed to the public due to the classified nature of much of the evidence. Dakota would testify, as would Margaret Foster, ensuring that the human cost of Davidson's actions was never forgotten. The wider network continued to unravel. Major Blackstone at Fort Liberty had been arrested while trying to destroy evidence, her role as a document forger exposing years of falsified records. The chaplain's assistant, Corporal Reeves, had broken down completely when confronted with his crimes, revealing how he'd identified vulnerable soldiers for recruitment, violating the sacred trust of religious counseling. Each arrest, each revelation, each trial added another layer to the understanding of how deeply the corruption had spread. It wasn't just about weapons or money. It was about the fundamental betrayal of the values that military service was supposed to represent. But there were also heroes. Soldiers who had refused recruitment despite desperate circumstances. Officers who had reported suspicions despite pressure to stay quiet. Investigators like Foster, who had paid the ultimate price for truth. Their stories were being collected, documented, turned into training materials for future generations of military personnel. The Foster case study became required reading at military academies, a cautionary tale about the dangers of looking the other way. Dakota kept Foster's medal in her office, a reminder of the cost of justice. Beside it sat a photo from his funeral, his daughters in black dresses, trying to be brave. On her worst days, when the corruption seemed endless and the fight futile, she would look at that photo and remember her promise. The truth would come out, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, because that's what heroes did. Not the ones who never felt fear or doubt or temptation, but the ones who felt all of those things and chose to do right anyway. Foster had been that kind of hero, and in her own way, carrying on his work, so was Dakota Rivers. The war against corruption would never truly end. There would always be those willing to trade honor for profit, security for crime, duty for personal gain. But there would also always be those willing to stand against them, to shine light into dark corners, to speak truth to power. As she boarded the plane for Pearl Harbor in the next phase of the investigation, Dakota carried with her the lessons of the Garrison incident. Trust but verify. Question everything. And always remember that the mission isn't just about catching criminals. It's about honoring those who serve with integrity. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about ensuring that sacrifice means something. The plane lifted off, carrying her toward new challenges, new corruptions to expose, new truths to uncover. Below, Fort Garrison continued its daily operations, forever changed by the events of that morning when a medal hit the floor and triggered more than just an alarm. It had triggered a reckoning, and the reckoning was far from over. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena Rodriguez, already on site in Hawaii, possible lead on naval supply irregularities, 3 destroyers worth of equipment unaccounted for. This is big. Dakota smiled grimly and began reviewing the initial intelligence. Yes, it was big. They were all big. Every corruption, every betrayal, every theft from those who served honorably. But she and her team would handle it. They would investigate, expose, and prosecute. They would continue Foster's work, honor his sacrifice, and ensure that his death had not been in vain. The medal in her pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, a reminder of the promise made and kept. Outside the plane window, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the landscape below. Somewhere down there, in bases and depots and armories across the country, soldiers were serving with honor, trusting that the system would protect them. Dakota Rivers and her team would make sure that trust was not misplaced. The mission continued. The watch went on. And James Foster's legacy lived in every truth uncovered, every corruption exposed, every life saved because someone had the courage to do what was right, no matter the cost.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our EV Story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.